Ever asked yourself in life if you're chasing the wrong things? Maybe a Porsche, maybe the next big house, maybe a Louis V bag. On today's episode, I sat down with PhD, professor, psychologist, Steve Kornopoulos. Bonus point for getting his name right. He is the president, CEO, and founder of Medius International, who helps companies and clients with psychology-based evidence within their culture, their people, their leadership. This podcast is just a mic drop of wisdom. Steve just talks with such clarity, and he can bridge whatever he's saying conceptually. He uses anecdotes, he uses stories and examples that really paint a picture for what he's trying to say. This was exceptional. Thank you, Steve. As entrepreneurs, we all experience challenges in our business journey. I'm JT Story, and the Grappling Growth podcast is my attempt at documenting my entrepreneurial journey while building my brands. I sit down with fellow entrepreneurs, understanding how they grapple with growth. I hope you find value and enjoy. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Steve, I'm curious, from all of your experience, what does growth look like to you?
Well, Joe, that's a loaded question, I think, because it's easy to have kind of a knee-jerk reaction and think about growth in very traditional terms, sales, market share, and of course, above all, profitability. But I think that that's a red herring because I think the answer to that question is a question. And the question is growth in what? So if we don't understand what the owners, the company owners, shareholders, founders, call them what you want, what their dream for the company is, what their purpose of the company is, then it's very difficult to know what it is you want to measure. So, for example, if you have a pharma company that has developed a life-saving new treatment, and the owners want to save as many lives as possible, so they decide to give away half the drug to people who can't afford it but need it. So obviously your profits are going to be far less, and your sales are going to be far less because you're giving product away. But it will fulfill what the owners want the business to do. So that's why I say that if you want to ask the question, what does growth mean to me? First, you have to ask the question, growth in what? And to ask the question, growth in what, you have to go back to the owners, the shareholders, the partners, and they will probably have a different answer. As a company gets larger, when you get into very large corporations with hundreds, if not thousands of shareholders, the definition of growth often is the traditional one, sales, market share, and above all, profit. Because, I mean, let's face it, when you have thousands of shareholders, they're not lending you the money out of the goodness of their heart. They're giving it to you. They're capitalizing you in order to get a better return than they could at the bank, right? So they expect you to keep your nose clean, be socially responsible, but they expect a better profit than they could get by putting the money in the bank and getting, 5-6%. So that's why I say that the question of what does growth mean to me, or what does growth mean, period, depends on the size of the company and above all on the dreams, the vision, if you want to call it, and the purpose of the organization, of the company. So I don't think growth means the same thing to all people. I think it stems from the owners, what they want from their business. Another example, if your business is, if the owners want to sell the business, then they're going to position it in a way that it dramatically shows profit as being much better than it would have been during normal operating times. So, because they want to show as good a profit as possible. So that will change the strategic direction of the company and where the investments are going to go and how they're going to measure growth. So to make a short story long, growth is what the owners define as growth, as important to them, as what their dream is for the company, what its purpose is.
stripping that back and looking at it from a personal lens throughout your life, and not talking about shareholders or owners, but your personal interpretation, how do you view growth in yourself?
Well, when I started my business, and should I give you a little bit of a background?
Absolutely. Go for it for the viewers.
So I have 3 careers. I started off in a clinical setting in a psychiatric hospital, not as a patient, but working in one. And spent 3 years there, did not enjoy the institutional setting, decided to reinvent myself, and I said, I'm going to try business. So I went back to do an MBA, and no sooner had I started the program that I got a job offer to be a sales rep in pharma. And I was there hauling the detail bag from doctor to doctor. So I worked in pharma for 20 years and went from being a sales rep, doing every other job in between, until I became general manager of one of the big life sciences companies. And then the time came when I looked at it and I said, psychology, business, how can we put them together? And I created my own company 30 years ago and brought in some partners whose companies were complementary. And so that was kind of the 3 iterations of my experience: clinical, corporate, and then entrepreneurial. And so if you ask me the question, what does growth to me mean personally? I always valued independence. The reason I did it was because I just put it down to ego, I suppose. I never liked reporting to anybody. I never liked telling people what I was doing, except for my partners. But so for me, growth meant achieving, milestones that were important to me in my business. Not just the financial side was never that important, because my attitude has always been, if you do good work, the money will come. If you focus on the money, sometimes it's a distraction from doing good work. And finally,
just a question on that, just to interject. A lot of our listeners here will be younger than you, and probably entrepreneurs that have not been running their business for 30 years, like myself. At this point, I've been running my business for 8 years, which is actually a good majority of my life so far. The point I'm getting at is, if someone is listening to what you've just said there, focus on the product, focus on doing good work, and then money will follow, as opposed to focusing on money as essentially it's a flywheel effect, really. If someone's listening to that, how do they not focus on the money? Because fundamentally, you run a business to make money, to make a profit. So how do you detach from the money as the outcome and focus more on the inputs?
Well, I would challenge that. I would say you make money in order to run a business. Right? You make money in order to fuel your vision, to fuel what it is you want from your business. Right? But to answer your question to younger folks who are starting out, first of all, you need a good idea. Right? Either a product or your own experience that you can then leverage into a product, into something that people are willing to pay you for. But I would say that the money is important. When you start, it's even more important. 2 things are important. Well, 3 things. A good idea, some financial backing, the ability to support yourself for a certain amount of time, and family support, because it's tough. It's tough. I'll give you a funny anecdote. My son came, who's an adult now. He said to me one day, Daddy says, I'd come home from a party when I was like 18 or 19 years old. It'd be like 3 o'clock in the morning. There you were at your desk working. And then some mornings I'd want to go fishing with my buddies, so I'd get up really early, 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd come down, and there you were at your desk working. And I never knew if you hadn't gone to bed yet or if you'd gotten up early. And he said, what gave you that entrepreneurial passion? And I told him, it's really simple. Abject terror at all the bills that I had to pay that month, at all the things that I had to pay for my family in that coming month. And so there's a lot of value to terror. It's it can be quite motivating. And so the money matters when you first start. You need something, you need to be able to sustain yourself. And if you don't have family support, then it's not, it's tough. It's not going to work.
That term, you said abject terror, right?
Abject terror.
Abject terror. Can you deconstruct that term for me? Because this is a new term, so I'm sure it's probably new to quite a few people listening.
Well, it just means that you're sitting there and you have this monster of bills that you have to pay, right? You've got a house, you've got kids in private schools and with braces on their teeth, and you have family expecting vacation. So you've got a lot of stuff to pay for that before, when you were a corporate guy, you weren't worried about it so much because you had that paycheck coming in regularly and you could do it. But when you're an entrepreneur, the pay is not that, it's not necessarily feast or famine, but it's very variable, right? When you're looking for business, right, you're not making money. And when you're delivering, you're not looking for business. And so I would say that two things, the variability of your money, of your earnings when you start out, it can be a real problem, right? Your cash flow can be a real problem when you first start out, and if you don't have family support for that or the means to do it, it can be pretty tough. So the abject terror is the stress that you feel at the weight of the responsibility that you have, or the financial responsibilities you have. So it's interesting, right? You make money to do the work. If you're working to make money, there's probably better ways to do it, right?
Can I ask you a personal question, and you don't have to answer it? You've been running your business for 32 years, is it?
Right.
In those 32 years, have you had a period where, lack of better terms, there's been a lot of financial pressure and you thought to yourself, fuck, maybe we're not going to make it, maybe I need to go back to the corporate world?
It's funny you asked that question, because I was a year into the business and I got a call from a huge pharma company. They said, we heard about you, we'd like to interview you for a job, vice president sales and marketing for some major global pharma company. And things had been slow. So I said, hey, doesn't hurt to listen, right? So I went and I listened, and I got the job, believe it or not. And it was funny because it had been a very difficult month, cash flow wise. And I was in Toronto, hadn't managed to land any business. And I remember being in my hotel room when the guy called, my would-be boss called and said, you've got the job. And I said, can I call you back? And I called my wife, and this is what I meant when I said a supportive family. She said to me, don't you dare do that. You've started, you stick with it. You know what you're doing, you're committed to your business. Don't you dare do that. We'll manage, even if we have to cash out retirement money. Don't you dare do that. I'll never respect you again if you do that. So, I hung up, I called the guy, I said, look, it's not going to work, sorry. And I had a very sleepless night. I was lying there going, what kind of idiot turns down a many six-figure job, to continue slogging away at his business? And it's very, very peculiar, because the next day I was on my way home from Toronto. I was lined up at the airport, and there were two lines coming in together. And who am I next to but a former boss from years previously? And we're chatting about what we're doing, and he says, you're just the guy we need. I've got a project for you. He says, here's the card of our VP HR. Call him. There's 5 projects for you. Tell him I told him to engage you in the job. And from that moment on, it was like the job was worth, I don't know, 150 grand for, a few months' work. It was incredible. just that chance encounter, right? So you really start believing in serendipity and in weird stuff, man. When that happens.
So, for you, and a message to young entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general who maybe they're experiencing a tough period, economic uncertainty, downturn, struggle, it's not clicking. What's one golden rule you'd give to someone right now who maybe feels like giving up based off of that story and just your business experience?
Well, I bring it back to a scientific concept which you may be familiar with, which is entropy. Are you familiar with entropy? So entropy is the fundamental principle of the universe in physics. So it means that everything moves from a position of order to disorder. From the moment order is created, it begins to move towards disorder and eventually to chaos. Right? So everything, our bodies, everything from the moment it begins moves to chaos, unless you're investing energy back into the system to keep it going. But sometimes the chaos just takes over. And I would say that throughout that journey, from that entropic journey into chaos, there will be new opportunities. You just have to be sensitive to them. So there is opportunity in chaos. You just have to look for it. So if your business isn't doing well, you have to ask questions. Why not? What is it that I need to change about my value proposition, my approach? Maybe this isn't the right business. Maybe this is something that I shouldn't be in, but maybe there's somewhere else within this. There's an opportunity.
I love that distinction there. And also mentioning entropy, order to disorder to chaos. I've read Jordan Peterson's books on such concepts, although he takes a bit of a different light in a psychological manner. But that, I think, is so golden. I'd like to share an experience that I had. So I started my business in 2017. 2019, I was working in the City of London at an investment bank, and I quit my job. And I had 2 out of the 3 pillars that you mentioned. I didn't have finances at the time, and I quit in a dose of rage, so to speak, but it was worth it. I was glad I did it. There was a big misalignment between me and the company that I was at, and that was it. The first year of running my business was hell. So this was May 2019. Black Swan events happened, COVID, something else happened, and come the April of 2020, a fairly similar position to you, not a few $100,000 offer, but I got to the point where April 2020 was in place, the economy was shut down, and I started looking at jobs on a local supermarket job board. Here in the UK it's called Asda, because I was at the point where I thought, picked up my phone, looked at my bank balance, looked at another bank and thought, this is going to be tough. But I said to myself, and I had my own moment of frustration and rage. We thought we were going to have a contract coming in, and then as we were going to contact the guy, we saw that he literally stole our whole strategy, concepts, ideas, and did it himself, which for me was very frustrating, to the point I said to myself, you have 1 month to make this work. And there was enough will, desire, push, force there to make sure that by the end of that month, I transformed my business. I went out, and I think to the point you made there, where a lot of businesses fell, and there could be externalities, there could be economic uncertainty, you might be in the wrong market, you might be selling the wrong product, and you might have to pivot slightly, which is pretty much what I did. And in that time, in that period, the biggest thing that changed my business, and I say this to, and I get loads of young entrepreneurs reaching out to me for pockets of advice, and quite often I'll just orientate them to one of these podcast episodes because this is what I wish was there to help me previously. But the first thing that I always look at whenever someone says things aren't working, I always look at the inputs. What are the numbers that we're putting into our business? And this could be as basic as What's your business development strategy? How many businesses are you finally contacting each and every day? And what do you expect? And I use the analogy of, you've got the best coffee shop in the world, but if you put a billboard in front of it, well, no one has a clue as to what you're doing. So quite often it's just a case of lifting that billboard up and actually going out and promoting and distributing and just getting your reach out there. That is one of the most, I think that's probably the fundamental issue when businesses are struggling to generate sales. Once you get to a multi-layered approach, or once you get to the place where you're earning a few $100,000 or a few million, then it's different constraints. But primarily, to get a business off the ground, in my view, it comes down to just getting enough signal and intent out to the market through touch points, engagement, and just essentially outreaching to people. What are your thoughts on that?
How much of a game changer would it be for your business if you could learn from the same A advisors as Tony Robbins, or the people who've been in close proximity to Dan Sullivan, famously the co-author of 10x is easier than 2x. Today's sponsor to the podcast is AI Simplifier. They have put together a 30-day roadmap program to help teach you how to implement AI into your business. They've helped people save 10 to 20 hours per week, add millions of dollars in additional revenue to businesses. And for those who listen to this podcast and decide to sign up with them, you will get a complimentary AI breakthrough session with Steve French, one of the co-founders, and myself to really pencil in and figure out what we can do with your business. Now, back to the episode.
Well, you have to be present. We developed a program a few years ago called the 6 Rules of Entrepreneurship. And a central rule there is that an entrepreneur never delegates his franchise. In other words, the trust that he or she have built with customers, you have to always maintain that, right? You have to be present. You have to be out there. As an entrepreneur, you can't just hire people and have them go do the work for you. Sure, you can hire people, but you always have to maintain presence at the customer level. You have to be out there. You have to be visible. You have to be out there. You have to be building that franchise for yourself and for your company. So, you have to be willing to reinvent yourself constantly. You have to be looking for opportunities within the chaos. You have to be present and visible. I'll give you another funny personal example, I think, and that is when I started the business, I was coming from 20 years in a corporate environment where we did things in a very disciplined way. And I remember in our living room, I had set up all kinds of flip charts, and I was doing my SWOT, and I was doing all kinds of analyses and projections. And my wife walks in and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm mapping out the business, planning everything out, and and because it was very comfy. I was very comfy being in that space where I knew what I was doing, right? SWOT analysis, strategic planning." So she comes in and she says to me, "Oh, this is really great, but you know that on Thursday, I have a $5,000 bill for the kids' private school due. So this is all good, but you better figure out how we're going to get that $5,000 by Thursday." And that was a wake-up call, is that you can't just fantasize your way to success. You can't plan your way to success. You can't, mentally try to jury rig it. You've got to be out there. You have to be present. You have to be talking to customers all the time, making contacts, looking for opportunities. And you get the opportunities in the strangest place. I mean, people you haven't spoken to in years. One of the things, by the way, I can strongly recommend, if you're a corporate person, whatever contacts you have that you've built up in your corporate life, nurture them, cherish them. Don't be a fair weather friend. Nobody wants to hear from you when you haven't spoken to them in 3 years, and all of a sudden you say, "Hey, Bill, I've started my own business. Have you got something for me?" This is not good, right? This is why whatever contacts you have built and established, you contact them regularly when the going is good. When you're a corporate guy and you're doing well and you're driving your Porsche and you got your beautiful home and everything's good, that's when you call those people. Because you need to show that you're interested in their lives as well. And so you maintain contact with all of your contacts, even if it's just an email that says, "Hey Bill, how you doing?" I say, "Well, not so good. I hurt myself in a ski accident. I hurt my back. Oh my God, I know what you're talking about. I had back surgery." So you keep that compassionate connection going. When you start your business, those contacts will be your life force. They will be the ones that give you that first piece of business.
I love that as a soundbite, and I firmly endorse what you've said. And I think at times people get lazy, or, as you said, fair weather, or they become expectant of, oh, I've got this contact, and we all hate it. I had a young lad reach out to me last week asking for my time, and he's reached out several times, and I've given him tons of resources, but I never hear from him until he needs something from me. And just as kind of a wall to protect my time, I just sent him a payment link to say, hey, if you want to book in a strategy session, here's the price. It's £100 for 30 minutes. That's it. I don't hear from him again, because I feel I'm someone who's really generous with my time, my energy, my efforts.
Yeah.
And when that is abused, and I'm not looking for anything directly in return, but if you're only purely contacting me because you want my help, my time is my most precious asset. It's non-renewable, and I want to just protect that layer there. And I'm sure as time goes on, your time, your hourly rate is probably exponentially higher than mine because of your experience and knowledge. And I hope that my hourly rate, whatever you want to price it at, increases as time goes on. But that point there is something that I feel a lot of people go amiss. And I think in this new digital AI world, everyone is trying to scale, streamline, automate what they're doing. But there's nothing that really replaces picking up the phone, giving someone a call, or sending someone a real authentic text to say, hey, I remember that you mentioned your daughter's in Athens. How's Greece this time of year? Just those small, just real precise points, they make such a difference.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned AI, and I think I mentioned to you, I've been working in AI for the last year for one of the big labs that tests LLMs. So that we're working on hundreds of LLMs. And in the psychology group, which I belong to, they have thousands of PhDs around the world working on this, and that is how to train AI to interact more effectively with humans. And we talk a lot about NI, natural intelligence. So humans have natural intelligence, and the idea is that AI should try to approach natural intelligence as much as possible. But there's a place where it all kind of falls apart, and certainly we're not there yet, and I'm not sure how we're ever going to get there, but that's compassion, right? Compassion. What is the basis of emotional intelligence? Is empathy and compassion. So how do you train AI to have compassion? Well, you can't. Like, we develop rubrics, which are the instruction manuals, the instructions for how AI should respond to every question from a human. And so we can tell it to say, I'm so sorry you're experiencing that. Oh, it feels, I can understand how difficult it is for you. But it can't understand, because the root of emotional intelligence is empathy and compassion, and the root of that is suffering. And so, when you haven't suffered, you can't actually relate. You can just, say the right words, but you can't relate to the other person. So this idea of being generous with your time, and I talk to everybody. Anybody who calls me and says, listen, can I have 5 minutes? Sure, no problem. It's part of building a network of people So let me wax philosophical here because you are a younger guy. When
philosophical or younger guy?
maybe both. So there are 3 stages of evolution in the human psyche. And they are having, doing, and being. Right? So first you have nothing. Your parents have everything, you have nothing. They give you a couple of bucks here and there. So you dream of, having your own stuff. And you acquire your own stuff. And then in your 20s, you get a job, you start making money, you start buying a nice car and this and nice clothing. And so you're into stuff. But then you realize that the stuff is kind of, it's not enough. So you want to do something with it. Now you want experiences. And so you spend your 20s, 30s, 40s accumulating experiences. This is quite normal, by the way. It's the normal progression of the psyche, having, doing, and being. But eventually, you get to that point where probably somewhere in your 50s, you begin to realize that you're going to die. And you're going to die soon, sooner than you want, for sure, right? My dad died at 46. Massive heart attack on a business trip, right? So at 50, normally the psyche begins, the subconscious begins to look at things and sees people dying around it and kind of goes, ooh, you're going to die. What are you doing to deal with that, right? How are you going to find peace in that reality? And so we transition to being. So we start looking at the things that are important to do as part of our personal legacy. I don't mean buildings and cars, I mean, right? And so it's very interesting. A lot of people today, it's very easy to get stuck in having and doing, right? The world is so full of things and so much pressure to buy and do another vacation, this, my model of Porsche is too old, I'm going to get another one. There's always something else. I need a Louis Vuitton. There's no end to it. And that's exactly where the corporate world wants you to be. Right? They want you to be in having and doing because that involves spending money. But the reality is, we know that failure to move into the 3rd stage as you get older, which is being, is the root of all human depression and anxiety and neuroticism. Much of it lies in that failure to give the subconscious what it wants, right? The subconscious wants answers. It's saying to you, what's going on? We're going to die. How come you're not dealing with this, right? And so my message to you is, the sooner you think about that, the better off you'll be. The sooner you begin to address that, because I have a painful reality to share with you, and that is that no one will ever care about your position, your money, your job, your car, your house, nothing. Nobody will care about any of those things. Believe me, no one. The only thing that will ever truly matter to you, your personal legacy, is the trail of kindnesses that you extended to others on their journey. That's all you're ever going to be remembered for, right? The kindnesses or the unkindnesses that you extended to others. So it's probably not relevant to you now because you're still having and doing, and it's normal to be there. And you don't let go of having and doing, by the way. As you move into being, you still do those things. They're grafted onto each other. But if you're not thinking about being by the time you're 50 or sooner, it's not going to end well. Right? It always ends in depression and misery and trying to spend your way into happiness and trying to spend your way into meaning. And so, that's my take on it.
That's fascinating. And as you've been speaking, I've been listening, observing, soaking in what you've said, and thinking to that point of, have I done anything right now where I'm being? And maybe it's just a general process. For you, was there a moment, a distinctive moment you could look at where you said, I've entered that being stage of life?
I don't think it works that way. It's not phased so clearly, but I think it happens slowly, and your subconscious tells you that it wants some answers. You start getting older and you start experiencing anxiety. You feel uncomfortable. You buy something and within a few weeks it doesn't mean anything to you anymore. And your subconscious is trying to get you to understand. So first it kind of taps you on the shoulder. It says, hey buddy, pay attention to me. Right? I need you to come up with some answers here. And if you don't answer it, you go, I'm busy right now with work, I gotta go look at that new car, and we're buying a big house. And if you don't pay attention to it, then it starts to smack you on the face, right? It starts to hit you to get your attention. And if that doesn't work, it kicks you in the ass. And eventually what it does is it makes you sick, right? Because you're not paying attention to it. So you look out for those signals, right? If you're doing things and you're really not happy, you're miserable, you have anxiety and depression, often it's a failure to transition. And Carl Jung believed that was the root of all human depression and anxiety later in life, was the failure to transition into being.
Are there any activities you feel a younger person could undertake in order to maybe examine themselves a bit better? Maybe someone's in an existential place where they feel as though they're not where they want to be, and they do want to get to that stage, that they could do in order to help them.
Well, I think a core question you have to ask yourself at every step of the way, regardless of your age, is whatever you're doing, because you know that this is going to come. You may want to deny it, you may want to, rationalize it. This is going to come no matter what. You're going to die, right? Possibly sooner than later. So you need to start paying attention to the things that really matter. And the things that really matter are rarely what you think they are when you're younger, because it's not stuff and it's not even experiences, right? The things that really matter. So I would ask myself, whatever I was doing, I would ask myself 3 questions, right? Is this useful? Is it kind? And is it joyful? Does it make me feel good to do this? And sort of it becomes a litmus test about almost everything you're doing, right? Is it useful? What's the purpose of this? What's it going to accomplish? What's it going to achieve? Who is it going to help? And is it kind, right? Or is it hurting people? And is it joyful? How do you feel about it? So, but this runs in parallel. This doesn't mean you can't pay attention to your business. It doesn't mean you can't make money. It doesn't mean you can't be successful. It doesn't mean you can't own a nice home, a nice car, take vacations. Those things are all great. But it's important to always have in the background this idea of having, doing, and being, right? And some people enter that earlier than others. Usually a death in the family or a death of a loved one, death of a parent, it kind of launches you earlier into that questioning. So is there something they can be doing? I think it's just as a start is to realize that it's there and read about it, and I don't know, maybe take up some spiritual practices, yoga, transcendental meditation, I don't know, whatever it is that calms you and centers you and gives you a chance to kind of reflect. But it's not natural for young people. It's not natural. It's really, but you won't believe how fast you become fit.
Well, it's I like to parallel it to seasons. Flowers don't grow in the autumn, do they? die. They replenish themselves. Leaves drop off the trees, but the leaves, the flowers, they grow in spring, and naturally autumn only comes after winter, spring, summer, and that's the process. And you hear people talk about, I'm in the summer of my life, I'm in the autumn, I'm in the winter, and that's it. And as you said, it's we all are walking expiry dates. We do not know when we're going to die, but we know as a guarantee we will stop breathing, and that is the truth. That is the fact of reality in life, and it's about how you take and go through that process. And I imagine some people never get to that stage of being, and they're very soaked in materialistic possessions and status and chasing the next shiny object.
You can do it forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why antidepressants, antidepressants are given like candy, right? Because there are a lot of very successful and very depressed people. There are unsuccessful and depressed people too. But there are many very successful people who should be happy based on what they have and what they do, but they're extremely depressed. And very often it's because they've really failed to confront that reality that's coming for them.
Steve, that's powerful. I want to take a sidestep away from this conversation and focus it a bit more on AI, because you have run your own business for 32 years, you've worked in pharma, but you said something really interesting about what you're doing with LLMs at present and how the last year has been. Just paint us a picture as to how the last 12 months have looked for you and sort of the work that you've been examining and looking at, because I think there's so much to unpack there.
Well, it started off with asking LLMs professional questions that would stump them, that would stump the LLM, right? Because so you know the answers because you work in it and live in it. So you'd ask an LLM a question that it really had trouble answering. And then the idea was to explain to it and develop a set of instructions around how to answer that correctly, right? And so, but they've become very, very good. I have to tell you, just in the first 3-4 months, it got harder and harder to stump it because they're just so good at researching the literature, and they'll come up with you stuff that you didn't even know, right? Mm-hmm. So then the process transitioned to having it interact with humans in a more human way, and it's extremely difficult. I have to tell you. Have you ever interacted with a bot when you're trying to solve some problem, or you've bought something on Amazon, it didn't show up, and they want you to use the bot, and so you ask the bot, my package didn't show up, and it says, I'm so sorry to hear that. We try very hard to ensure that packages are delivered on time, and we are very deeply distressed by cut it out.
Just get to the point. That's it.
It's like, because the rubric has been designed to, here's what you've got to say. But a human wouldn't say those things.
Uh-huh.
It'd say, oh my goodness, you're kidding. Let me see what I can do for you, right? Mm-hmm. Let me see what strings I can pull. Let me see who I can call and get you an answer. Mm-hmm. So I think that we're sort of hitting a place where, we talked about NI, natural intelligence. The problem with NI, which AI aspires to, is that we don't understand NI very well. We don't understand human intelligence. We're a very strange species, right? We're not a fact-driven species. We're a story-driven species. Mm-hmm. We're a narrative-driven species. So narrative psychology. So this is why you try to convince someone on the basis of facts, and they'll run circles around you, right? Because they've got an answer to everything, and you can never convince them of anything because they have a story that they like, that resonates with them. A good friend of mine, we were talking about truth, and I said, there's no truth anymore. You got to go to 27 different sources to get a kind of an idea and cobble together your own truth. Excuse me. And he said, no, you're wrong. He says, there's truth. Truth is whatever confirms what I already believe or what I want to believe. Right? That's the truth. And so, and of course, that's very telling, right? Because we create narratives that describe our experiences, and then we get attached to those narratives, to those stories. And then we act on those stories. And you can present all kinds of facts, but, I mean, we have now in North America, I don't know if it's in the UK, but we have measles outbreaks in the US and Canada. We're about to lose, I think Canada already lost its measles-free status. The US is headed in the same direction. Because after COVID, people became vaccine hesitant. And so now they're not immunizing their kids for measles, and you've got resurgences of measles and other diseases because they don't want to vaccinate. So, and there have been many studies. You try to convince people, you bring in the biggest experts, immunologists, and they'll bring groups of people who are vaccine hesitant, and they'll have these world-renowned experts talk to them about it. And afterwards you question them, and, did it move the needle for you? And they said, well, yes, it did kind of inform my opinion a little bit, but I still wouldn't vaccinate. Right? In other words, didn't change the behavior. Okay, it gave me some interesting information, but their narrative, their story that they're locked into is very important, and to them. That's their truth, and they want to believe it, and they want to hang on. They want to hang on to it, and so we're a narrative-driven species. We don't operate on the basis of facts and figures and data. Mm-hmm. We operate on the basis of stories that reflect our experience, and that support our beliefs, whether those are religious beliefs or who knows, right? And so, how do you get past that? How do you get past them? Well, the only way to deal with one story is to have a better story. Mm-hmm. Right? You got to have a better story to tell, and that may not convince them. You're not there to convince them anyway. You just tell your story, and hopefully something of it kind of migrates over. So narrative psychology is a very, very interesting field. It's the things that we tell ourselves that both hold us back and make us move forward, help us move forward. There's something called, the intention behavior gap. Have you ever heard of that?
Not directly, but I'm trying to piece it together.
Okay, so it's an area in psychology that we study, and that is, so it's interesting that why is it that some people intend to do something, they want to do it, they really, really want to do it, but they can't cross the barrier into actually executing it and actually doing it, actually taking the steps to do it, right? And some people will say, well, they just don't have sufficient motivation. But motivation is a circular concept anyway. So we only know if you're motivated to do something if you've actually done it, right? So, for some people, it's fear. They're just too afraid to jump that gap, to take that risk, jump that gap. So it's the intention motivation gap. It's fascinating to read about, and there aren't any really clear answers around it. But it's certainly relevant for employees, right? Because you can have the best intentions on the job, but if you can't make it a reality, then it's just a dream. It's just something you wanted to do, and I would have, I could have, I would have, I should have, I wanted to, but I didn't. So, however, we do know that crossing that gap largely depends on the narratives that you tell yourself, on the stories that you tell yourself. It's strange, eh? That we are such a story-driven species, that we experience the world through stories. It's quite a, yeah.
Yeah, well, from my experience, and I've worked in the advertising marketing landscape for a while now, you do see, if I just presented you with statistics and facts, that's one thing. But if I was able to clone you, maybe you have a twin, copy and paste you and say, hey, here's Simon, and this is what he's done, and this is what we've done with him, and this is Simon's story arc, and this is the pain that he experienced, and this is a solution, and this is the dream outcome. And then I was able to visually show you, and that's the biggest thing in marketing. It's don't tell, show. And this is where telling is, well, here's the facts, here's the figures, here's your black and white. But we know, if we cut a line and we say, we've got rationale and we've got emotion, what is going to sell more as time goes on? It's the emotion. It's the reason why I've bought this energy drink here. You might jump off now because you've seen that and you thought, why is he drinking a Monster? But the point is, it's if I said, well, this drink has 0 sugar and it has all of these words that I can't even pronounce on it, and ingredients, carbonated water, whatever, and it's X amount of calories, no one cares about the facts of the drink and what it has. What they care about is, how am I going to feel? How does it taste? When I clip the top of the cap open and I hear that sound and I touch the can and it's nice and cold and I drink it and it tastes refreshing, and I think that there's certain industries that do it really well, i.e. drinks, because you can't sell a drink through tasting it through an advert. Same as perfume, but what do they do when you see all of the perfume brands out there when they're promoting their products? They sell a desired state, which is an emotion, which is an attachment. So when you and your partner are going to sleep and they're looking at and they're remembering that advert and they're thinking of that idyllic state in the Amalfi Coast in Italy, and they're thinking, or let's take a Greek island, Mykonos maybe, piecing that together and thinking of, oh, that's what it looks like, and just visualizing through emotions.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we make decisions primarily on the basis of emotions that are linked to our stories. It's interesting when we talk about stories. So you'd think that when a smart person, highly intelligent person goes down a rabbit hole, you'd think it was fairly easy to get them out because they're smart, right? You can rationalize and you can help get them out. But it turns out that it's actually the exact opposite. When smart people go down rabbit holes, it's almost impossible to get them out because they're very, very good at creating tunnels all underneath the rabbit hole, right? And it's almost impossible to get them out because they can rationalize anything, right? They're so intelligent that they use that to create vast tunnels and cities under the rabbit hole where they can get lost, and you can't, a person who might not be quite as clever is in that rabbit hole. You can sort of reach your arm down, grab them and pull them out. But when they've got all those channels going underneath, so interestingly enough, smart people are much harder to change their minds.
Well, I think, as the saying goes, the idiom, sometimes people are too smart for their own good, and it's so spot on. Where, for me, and you're there, you've run your own team, your own business, I've seen that, and I don't want to put down anyone in my team, but sometimes the guys who aren't the smartest, they do the best work because they're like soldiers. You say to them, you need to cross from here to here. They say, yeah, okay, no problem. They do it. Whereas the really intelligent people, they start from here. For some reason, they just start doing that. And you say, no. I need you to get to here, not just continuously zig and zag and go up and down. And they look at you and you think, you feel like you want to hit your head against the wall. And it's like, look, let's sit, but I want to do this. And it's like, no. And I say this all the time to my team. Make the main thing the main thing. That we always have one main objective in our company, one main goal. And I always say to them, if we just smash the main goal, nothing else matters. But if we miss the main goal and we do all of these fancy things, it's all irrelevant. And it's just really about sticking to that. And I've found that the best people who have come into my team are those who can just block out the noise and just focus. And then you look at it and you think, actually, that's where the compounded growth comes from. And I've seen it. I've got really intelligent friends. I went to a really good university, the University of Birmingham, top 100 uni in the world. I've got friends who've gone to Oxbridge, Oxford, Cambridge, a few other unis. And you see them, they get stuck in this hamster wheel because they over-perfectionize, they over-internalize, they do way too much for what needs to be done. And it's just simplify the process, and that is it.
Well, so the current model that psychologists use to look at personality is called the 5-factor model. And it's the first a-theoretical model developed. It's about 30 years old. Before that, there were dozens and hundreds of models that were linked to specific theories. Freudian, Jungian, you name it, right? Everybody had a model of personality. But the 5-factor model it's quite interesting. It's what we call a lexic model. It doesn't require a theory. It was based on a discovery some 30 years ago that if you ask 100 people to describe themselves, their family, their colleagues, their friends, and you compare how 100 people described themselves and others, it's interesting because they use almost the same terms. They may not use the same exact terms, but they talk about the same things. So then the researchers took it further. They talked to 1,000 people, 5,000 people. Then they took it internationally. They talked to people all over the world, in Africa, and they said, describe yourself. And strangely enough, people around the world describe themselves and others along very similar lines. He's very selfish. He's not very thoughtful. He's not very kind. He's not. So, in fact, from the thousands of people that they interviewed, they developed the 5-factor model, which is 5 dimensions of the human personality. It's very good. And at the top is openness. So openness means, are you receptive to the world? Right? But funny enough, so it's called ocean.
I remember I looked into this concept when we spoke last time, and
right. The second
I don't know if you saw on LinkedIn, but I published a post that did really well. I sent it to you afterwards on neuroticism. I butchered that word. State neuroticism, and went down a bit of a rabbit hole. Did a bit of my own research, and it was a post that did quite well, but it was off your concept there, and it had me thinking about those people who have the highest propensity.
How much of a game changer would it be for your business if you could learn from the same A advisors as Tony Robbins, or the people who've been in close proximity to Dan Sullivan, famously the co-author of 10x is easier than 2x. Today's sponsor to the podcast is AI Simplifier. They have put together a 30-day roadmap program to help teach you how to implement AI into your business. They've helped people save 10 to 20 hours per week, add millions of dollars in additional revenue to businesses. And for those who listen to this podcast and decide to sign up with them, you will get a complimentary AI breakthrough session with Steve French, one of the co-founders, and myself to really pencil in and figure out what we can do with your business. Now, back to the episode.
Could you just elaborate on ocean?
Well, interestingly enough, so the second is conscientiousness. And they've been trying to validate each of these to see, what do they actually accomplish in real life? And so the first one that they have validated is conscientiousness. And now we know that conscientious people do better in business. Conscientious people tend to be more successful. They are retained more. They're paid more. So it's interesting that it has real life benefits. But it's funny because conscientiousness seems to only give you success at the middle levels.
So just to interrupt you, when you say conscientiousness, I'm listening to you right now saying, okay, I think I'm conscientious. What are the typical traits of someone who is conscientious?
Well, they're task oriented. They want to take the job from the beginning all the way to the end. They want to see it. They want to do it well from beginning to end, right? So they're conscientious about their work. It's like they want to, excuse me. They'll go the extra mile to make sure it's good, that it works well, right? They'll follow it through. But interestingly enough, the trait, the dimension that is more relevant at higher levels in organizations, strangely enough, it's extroversion. So it's funny because extroverted people tend to move higher in organizations and more quickly, but they're not necessarily that successful. So we like extroverts because they're friendly and they talk a good talk and they make all kinds of promises, but they don't necessarily always deliver. But usually at the top you'll find a lot of extroverted people. But in the middle ranks, you have your conscientious people, the people who are responsible for getting the job done. To your point, right? About the people who kind of, maybe we can do it a different way. Why are we doing it this way? Maybe we'll do it tomorrow. Wait, we should wait and see what happens, right? And you have the conscientious person who goes, okay, let's get the job done. Let's get it started, right? Mm-hmm. So, but at the base of all of this, at the base of ocean, is neuroticism. So neuroticism, if you're very high on neuroticism, it's very difficult to actualize those other levels, right? The openness, the conscientiousness, the extroversion, the agreeableness. So neuroticism kind of poisons everything, right? If you're high. So what are some of the traits within neuroticism? Introspection. Are you the kind of person who looks at his behavior and learns from it, learns from mistakes, learns from feedback? Do you question yourself every day and say, should I have done that? Was that a good idea? Maybe I'll try something different next time. So that ability to introspect is at the base of neuroticism. And if you're very low on that ability, you're not asking yourself those questions. You're just going, okay, well, it felt good, let's do it. Then above introspection, there's defensiveness, right? So if you're very defensive, you'll never learn anything from you. Yeah, I had one person say to me, I am the most introspective person in the world. And so I said, well, so how do you explain this? Well, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't me. I wasn't there. I didn't. So they got a million excuses for why, right, this didn't work for them. So defensiveness basically neutralizes introspection. And then, of course, you've got people who have a highly externalized locus of control. So that means to what extent the things that happen to you, to what extent were you responsible for them versus other people. So somebody who has a highly externalized locus of control, it's never their fault, right? It's, kids do that, right? My son would come home, I'd say, how come you didn't do well in math? That a teacher's no good.
I want to share an example that I heard from a podcast that I listened to back in the summer, which I think summarized that point so well. And I took so much from this CEO. He said something in the realms of, when my team does well, or when the company does well, it's because of the team. And when we fell, it's because of me. And when I listened to that, I thought it was so refreshing, because quite often when people succeed, we succeed because I came up with this idea. And you know what? I knew my strategy was, and this is the part of life. One thing that is also guaranteed with death is failure. I've failed more times than probably most, and I'm 30 years old. But the thing is it's using that introspection, as you said, to see and look at things and think, okay, where can I take accountability? And fundamentally, where can I improve? And you quite often hear this narrative, and I talk very openly about this, and even a friend spoke to me. I had a pretty crappy period in business a few years ago. And the easy thing is to say, yeah, well, wasn't too good because I hired this person and this team member didn't do too well. And, the economy was there. But if you just trace back 10 seconds ago to what I said, I hired this person. What does that mean? That decision comes down to me. Whatever they do, that their performance is a reflection of an action I made. And it's so easy for people to turn around and say, well, yeah, the failures happened, and they point the finger. But as they say, when you point one finger, you've got three fingers pointing back at you. And that's the thing. That's why I try to reflect and be introspective and think to myself, actually, when circumstances prevail and things happen, how do I look at things and think, actually, maybe this is just part of the course, and yeah, that's it. I'm really curious, the E&A, what does that look like in Ocean?
Oh, well, you're talking about extroversion. So E is extroversion, right?
Okay, extroversion.
So people who are and A is agreeableness, meaning that you're willing to work with other people. You're not constantly fighting. You're not constantly everything's not an egoic competition, right? Agreeableness means, okay, yeah, this sounds like a good plan. Let's give it a try, right? You're willing to accept other people's ideas. But of course, in neuroticism, if you're highly narcissistic, right, and it's always about you, right, it's very difficult to be agreeable because it's always about you. That's why I say neuroticism. If you're high on neuroticism, on any of those traits, it makes everything else so much more difficult. Which is why typically when I interview, I look for neuroticism. Because that's what's going to cause you the biggest problems in any relations with employees. It's not going to be their functional elements, because you know what? Anybody can be trained to do anything. Most jobs, you can learn how to do them, right? And so back in the day, we didn't talk like that. We used to say it wasn't a question of neuroticism, it was a question of character, right? We didn't talk about Ocean and all this great stuff. We talked about character. Somebody with character. And so I always look for neuroticism. And funny story, back to AI for a moment. One of my colleagues had a job opening in his department, and he posted the job internally, and no respondents, so posted it externally. He got 2,000 applications. 2,000 applications. So he ran them. He says, so I didn't really have to run them. I could just read them and tell you they were all written by AI. And he says out of the 2,000, 1,986 were all written by AI. And so for him, it was immediately like, didn't want to look at them. He just chose those people that took the trouble to write it themselves. And those are the people he interviewed. Now, is that a good thing? I don't know. But I think that if you don't have the conscientiousness and the pride in yourself to write your own CV and letter, and maybe you don't have the competencies or the skills, I get that. Not everybody's a good writer. That's possible. But generally, you should make that effort, because just sloughing it off on AI, it's not a good thing. It's not going to be productive for you. Every manager I speak to who gets AI written CVs, don't even look at them. But now when you interview, if I were interviewing for a job, I could simply go to AI and ask the question, give me the top 20 questions asked in interviews for an engineering job, plus all the correct answers, the best answers. And within 15 seconds, you'd have it all there, right? So anything that they're going to ask you, there's already an AI. And you notice it when you interview people, when they give you answers that are too... that's a characteristic of AI. It's always perfect. I can tell a letter written by AI because it's too good. It's too good. So the answers are always perfect. And so when I interview people, sometimes so often companies will hire me as the last stage interviewer. So the people, they've got their 3 top candidates, they've weeded them out, AI did the initial screening, and then they've sent them for psychological tests, and then they say, can you see them just for one last look, one last glance? And I'll take them for lunch, and I ask them off-the-wall questions, things that no AI would ever think of. One of my favorites is, tell me about your first job as a kid. Like, what did you do? What was your first summer job?
It does tell you so much about people.
Well, the guy says, I am vice president marketing. I've got a 30-year career. You're asking me about, my first job? Yeah, well, what did you do? I started as a dishwasher in a restaurant. And they'll tell you about their jobs, and, I'll ask them, so what did you learn from it, right? And they'll usually give you some bull answer, right? Some perfectly crafted, wonderful answer. So what I'm looking for real people. I want a real person, a real personality. Somebody says to me, I said, what did you learn from that job? He said, I learned never, ever to do this job, this type of work again. It was so motivating to go to school. He says, I learned never to do this job again. But, he says, I learned compassion for the people who didn't have a choice, the people that I worked with who didn't have a choice. That's what I want. I want to see compassion. Because at the end of the day, it's the neuroticism and the lack of compassion that will make your life miserable in your workplace.
Yeah, Steve, you say that.
I'm losing your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. I hired a guy back in 2022. On paper, had all the experience, all the kudos, credentials. Biggest arsehole I've ever hired in my life. Like, with a capital A and all caps for the rest of it. And I just thought to myself, I was like, I don't know why I hired him. Well, I know why. It was because, again, the CV checked out. And this was pre-AI boom and everything. But his neuroticism, his attitude towards people. And I've always tried to run my businesses with a very flat structure. I don't call people employees, I call them team members. I really try to think of continuity because fundamentally this is a team. In football, soccer, you cannot score a goal without having a whole orchestrated team. But there was something about this guy, and I think he lasted 4 or 5 months, and that was it. We had to get rid of him because he was a cancer in the company and the culture, and the way how he spoke to people and the way how he thought he was, you would think he was the CEO, president, and I just thought, no, we don't have that in here. And again, I think to your point, asking those questions, those off-the-cuff questions, I've done a lot of talking today, they give you way more context about the person than asking them the cookie-cutter off-the-shelf questions. And when now I hire, I ask for, and a very similar example, 2,000 applications. I did a recent hiring round, 270 applications. I put one task in, and of the people who applied, I think, call it 20% did the task, if that. And it was to send me a 1-minute video, no longer than a minute. If it's over a minute, that's it. You're disregarded. A 1-minute video answering 2 questions, that's it. Just to see how quickly they would answer it. And it would have to be off the cusp. And as I said, 80% disregarded straight away. And it was self-explanatory. Leave them here, and people would be asking me, oh, how do I upload the video? If you can't use your head to upload a video to a platform like Indeed, then you can't be hired. It's simple. If 10 other people can do it, then it's possible. It's not like I'm giving you a run around. And then of those videos, and I took the time to go through all of them, quite a few of the people would give me copy and paste videos, everything was AI based from the majority of people. But the reason why I did that activity is because, yeah, sure, we can use some deep fake AI. We could go to Higgins Field and get a video done. But I'm going to know straight away, as you said, the one big problem with AI is it's perfect. I'm looking for the imperfections. I'm looking for the but all of those small, minute details that are going to come from a human. I'm going to look at when their lips are talking, if it's all succinct or not, and we're going to be able to spot that well enough. Why? Because we've been humans for all of our lives, and we know what a human-based response looks like compared to an artificial intelligence response base looks like.
Well, imperfection, of course, is key.
Exactly.
Imperfection is key to beauty. I don't know if you remember some of the supermodels. So if you have a supermodel with a perfectly symmetrical face, they will often put like a little mark on her face, right? They used to call them beauty marks. Because if your face is too perfect, it is extremely irritating to the viewer. Because we subconsciously expect imperfection. And it's, of course, very ironic because as humans, we strive for perfection, knowing that we're never going to get to it. Mm-hmm. And if we were to get to it, we would despise it because you shouldn't be able to get to it. And so it's interesting that you see these supermodels, and there's always, if you look, pay attention, they'll always have something that distracts from the perfection of their appearance. And so that imperfection is very important because that's how humans develop connections, right? You don't want to be, is there anybody more boring at a party than the perfect person? Beautifully dressed, Porsche outside. I don't have a Porsche, by the way. I just mentioned it because it's the first car that comes to mind. But you know, so they got the perfect car, the perfect look. They're handsome, they're fit, they're buff. You know, there's something wrong.
100%. I'll give you my last closing example story before we wrap up. I was in Thailand a few years ago, got talking to this guy. Turned out he was an influencer, and quite honestly, I don't give a shit if you're an influencer or you're a bin man. You're a human to me. We're all people fundamentally. But speaking to this guy, and this is after a few drinks, but he opened up to me and just said, I struggle to be myself because I feel as though I'm always having to be perfect or whatever. And you would see this guy online, like, I'm not gay, but he had an amazing physique. He had a very good physique. You could tell he did a lot of work, and a man respects that or deserves a compliment like that if he's done that work. Good for him. But wow, the insecurities. This guy just couldn't have fun, was soulless, didn't have friends. And it was funny because I saw a photo of him pop up. He lives in Dubai now, when I was in Dubai. And I just thought, wow, you haven't done any of that work. You're doing everything for the Porsche and showing that you're on yachts and doing all of this. And I thought, wow, there's been a bit of time that's elapsed here, but you still haven't changed from what you said to me at this party.
Yeah, because these are delusions that are implanted. I came up with an aphorism some time ago. I said, if you fail to fill your life with what you want, others will fill it for you with what they want from you. Right? So people are putting constantly ideas into our heads about what we should have, should do, should want, should be, and those ideas they can take over, and you lose your humanity, you lose your soul, you lose your person. I look for imperfection. I like imperfection because in imperfection there's always hope, right? In imperfection there's the hope that you can work on something and make it better. But in where do you go from perfection?
Steve, it's been a pleasure. What's next for you?
It's been great. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good.
I was just curious, what's next for you?
Oh, what's next for me? Well, I'm still working on the AI. And this is my first podcast. I've never done this before. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah. I mean, what's next for me is, what's worse than getting older, than getting old?
Tell me.
Not getting old. So basically, you want to keep yourself healthy, engaged, thinking, working till you die, right? So you're contributing. I see people take up chess and bridge and all kinds of games, and they're doing Sudoku, and they're doing bird watching, and I'm going, look, the key to, it's personal opinion, but the key to staying healthy, both mentally and physically, is to be relevant, to produce, to contribute to others, right? To be at the top of your game all the time, to always be leveling up, staying on top of your game, and another one of my aphorisms is, you don't become irrelevant because you're old. You get old because you allow yourself to become irrelevant. So that's what I leave you with, right? Stay relevant. Stay. Keep pushing the envelope. Keep learning. Keep taking courses. Never stop learning. Keep contributing. Keep creating value.
Steve, that's where wisdom meets power. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.